Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
Conan the Barbarian, released on May 14, 1982, was John Milius's great pulp myth sermon, with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Robert E. Howard's sword-swinging Cimmerian in a world of snow villages and desert temples, giant snakes, and basil polydorus brass. It opens in darkness, on a black screen, before any image of Spain, and before any hammer strike of the score. One line appears in white type, with the philosopher's name beneath it in plain capitals. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. Friedrich Nietzsche. That line is the warning label on the whole film. The Cimmerians on screen take their name from a real Iron Age people, while Crom, the god Conan curses and prays to, carries an Irish name tied to a stone idol in County Cavan. Thulsa Doom's snake cult came partly from Charles Manson and Jim Jones, whose People's Temple ended in the deaths of 909 people in Guyana on November 18, 1978. Over the Mountain of Power hangs the shadow of Hassan-i-Sabbah's fortress at Alamut. Robert E. Howard, the man who invented Conan's world, shot himself in the front seat of his car in Cross Plains, Texas, at the age of 30. The film looks like barbarian fantasy. Underneath, it carries archaeology and pulp theosophy, Irish folklore and Nietzsche, Persian assassination legends, and late 20th century American cult panic. Milius made a fur loincloth parable about suffering and the cold comfort of steel. The Nietzsche line comes from Twilight of the Idols, written in 1888 and published in January 1889. In German, Nietzsche wrote it in the singular, "Was mich nicht umbringt, macht mich stärker." The closer English sense is, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." The film card turns it into the broader first-person plural that English speakers have repeated ever since. Nietzsche placed the maxim under the heading "From the War School of Life." Months after he wrote it, on January 3, 1889, he collapsed in a street in Turin and never recovered his sanity. That is the kind of detail Conan the Barbarian is built from. Milius chose the exact line that tells the audience how to read the next 2 hours. Before the film becomes a revenge story, it has already declared itself as a Nietzschean parable. Long before Robert E. Howard wrote a word about Conan, Assyrian scribes had already put the Cimmerians into the historical record. Neo-Assyrian cuneiform letters from the reign of Sargon II, around 714 BCE, named them as the Cimmerians, a steppe people pressing down from the north. The intelligence reaching Sargon came through his crown prince Sennacherib, who later took the throne and kept the file alive. Around 672 BCE, Esarhaddon defeated their king Toashba and recorded the victory in royal inscriptions. The Cimmerians did not stay on the margins. Their next king, Dugdami, also called Ligdamus in Greek sources, sacked the Phrygian capital Gordion around 675 BCE and then took the Lydian capital of Sardis around 644 BCE. He died in 640. His son, Sandak-Shatru, held the line for another decade. Herodotus backs the Sardis campaign in History's Book 1, paragraph 15. This is paperwork as much as legend. Behind Conan's tribal name were horse nomads who rode into the Near Eastern archives with fire behind them. Herodotus gives the broader story in History's Book 4, paragraphs 11 and 12. According to him, the Cimmerians lived on the Pontic-Caspian steppe north of the Black Sea until the Scythians pushed them south. They fled across the Caucasus into Anatolia, burned Greek cities, frightened kingdoms, and then disappeared into absorption. Howard knew the outline. He rode in West Texas in the early 1930s with a small library and a predator's appetite for ancient peoples. He read history the way other writers read plot manuals. A name like Cimmerian carried weight because it already sounded half-buried. By giving Conan to the Cimmerians the Assyrians fought and Homer half-remembered, Howard changed the texture of the character. Conan was no generic barbarian from a fake tribe. He came from a people who belonged both to cuneiform records and to the border of Hades. In Howard's essay, The Hyborian Age, written around 1932 and serialized in the fan magazine The Fantagraph from February to November 1936, he traced his fictional prehistory through cataclysm and migration. Only the first part appeared in the Fantagraph. The first complete book edition came out in 1938. In that essay, Howard wrote that the survivors of the Cimmerians eventually became the Gaels, the ancestors of the Irish and the Highland Scots. That is pseudo-history, but it rests on a real ethnonym. The film keeps the bones. Conan's village in the snow, Crom on the mountain, iron in the forge, and cold everywhere. Spain stands in for a world that Howard placed before recorded history. The exact spot where the film's Cimmerian village burns is in the forest of Valsaine, south of Segovia in central Spain. At Cabo de Gata Natural Park in southeastern Almeria, the Tree of Woe stood among the sand dunes. The tree was a styrofoam and plaster prop built on a wood and steel skeleton, mounted on a turntable and dismantled after filming. About 12 kilometers west of Almeria City, the production built the Temple of Set, its most expensive set, at $350,000. Cimmeria is only one country on Howard's larger map. In the same essay where he traced the Cimmerians forward to the Gaels, Howard drew a full pre-Atlantean world of kingdoms and migrations, plus ancestral races. The essay runs 16 typed pages, full of geography and ethnology, placed roughly 12,000 years before the present. The film puts very little of that exposition on screen. Conan never pauses to explain the map. Still, he walks through a world built from Howard's system. Howard's method was simple and effective. Rather than invent every culture from nothing, he took real names and old peoples, then shifted familiar civilizations into a single lost age under light disguise. Aquilonia, the dominant Western kingdom, is medieval France with a Roman skeleton. Its capital is Tarantia. Its kings wear sun-shaped crowns, and its knights carry the feel of Charlemagne's world. South of Aquilonia lies Stygia, Egypt with the names rearranged. It has pyramids and a snake priesthood, plus a great river and dark-robed sorcerers who worship Set. North of Cimmeria are Vanaheim and Asgard, drawn from the Vanir in the Aesir of Norse cosmology, with pale raiders moving through snow. Hyperborea in the northeast takes its name from Greek myth, where Pindar's Olympian Three placed a people beyond the north wind. West of Cimmeria are the Picts, a real ethnonym Roman writers applied to the Iron Age painted peoples of northern Britain. South of Aquilonia, Shem becomes the land of Semitic city-states, and Howard borrowed names like Asgalon and Pelishtia from biblical Hebrew. East of Aquilonia sits Zamora, a thieves' and sorcerers' kingdom with Romani and Persian coloring. Vendia draws on India. Farther east, Hittite draws on China and takes its name from the Khitan people, the same root that gave Marco Polo his café. Iranistan is Iran, under almost its own name. South of Stygia, Kush takes its name directly from the historical African kingdom of Kush, attested in Egyptian and biblical sources from the 2nd millennium BCE. Hyrcania, east of the inland sea, is the Mongol Scythian steppe. Subbotai is Hyrcanian. The name comes from real Hyrcania, the Greek and Roman name for the Caspian region of northern Iran, which Howard moved onto a horse archer culture farther east. This is why the world feels older than the film has time to explain. A slave market or a caravan can carry traces of something recognizable. So can a temple or a mountain pass. Howard pushed the cultures of the ancient and medieval world back into prehistory, then rearranged them under new names. Milius understood that trick. The film never needs to say Hyrcania, Stygia, or Aquilonia out loud. The Temple of Set reads as Egyptian, the slave merchants as Levantine. When Subbotai shoots a bow, the memory of Mongol and Scythian horse archers comes with him. The world is real memory inside a fictional cosmology. Crom is the only god Conan acknowledges, and he does it with suspicion. In the opening scene, Conan's father tells the boy that no one in the world can be trusted. Crom lives on a great mountain, and Cimmerians know what to ask of him: courage at birth, then nothing. The god does not protect or comfort, he barely seems to care. Before the final battle, Conan kneels in the snow and gives the famous prayer: "Crom, I have never prayed to you before. I have no tongue for it. No one, not even you, will remember if we were good men or bad, why we fought or why we died. All that matters is that today, two stood against many. That's what's important. Valor pleases you, so grant me one request, grant me revenge. And if you do not listen, then to hell with you." The grimness is the whole point. Crom is the shape of the universe after comfort has been removed. The name came from a real Irish tradition. In what is now County Cavan, Ireland, a stone idol called Crom Cruach stood in the lore of Mog Slecht, the Plain of Prostrations. The 12th century metrical Dinshenchus, a collection of place name poems compiled from older oral material, describes Crom Cruach as a stone idol plated in gold surrounded by 12 smaller stones. The poem says the Irish sacrifice the firstborn of every family there to win milk and grain. In the 9th century tripartite life of St. Patrick, Patrick topples the idol with his crozier while Christianizing Ireland. The Killycluggan stone, a carved Iron Age boulder now preserved in the Cavan County Museum at Ballymamesduff, is traditionally identified with Crom Cruach. A replica stands beside the original site. The identification is plausible rather than certain. Irish folklore also preserves a figure called Crom Dub, meaning black Crom, tied to the harvest festival of Lughnasadh. He survived in pilgrimages and folk customs into the modern era. Myra McNeil's 1962 study, The Festival of Lughnasadh, is the standard treatment. Howard's Crom shares little with the Irish material beyond the name and the bleak tone. Conan's Crom lives on a mountain, ignores prayer, gives one gift at birth, and then leaves you alone. No serious source treats Howard's god and Crom Cruach as the same deity. Howard brought a name with weight from Celtic revival reading and built his own god beneath it. Milius then pushed that god closer to Norse in Germanic models, especially the Wagner-influenced version of Fate that runs through the Bayreuth productions of The Ring. The cultural historian David Huckvale has noted that the Tree of Woe and the costuming of certain ritual scenes echo the 1876 Bayreuth Ring stagings almost line for line. So the prayer before the final battle has several layers at once. The speech is Milius's. Howard supplied the god. The name belongs to an Irish stone that St. Patrick is said to have cracked with a stick. The production history is almost as strange as the mythology. Oliver Stone wrote the first script for Conan the Barbarian, and his version was set in a post-apocalyptic future. Conan led an army against 10,000 mutants. The script had rival queens and cloning, DNA manipulation, and a villain named Thoth Amon. Stone has spoken openly about his cocaine and depressant use during this period. He was turning out roughly 4 hours of unfilmable script. Producer Dino De Laurentiis put the shooting cost at $40 million, and the studio could not commit to it. Milius entered and changed the entire shape. He kept the crucifixion sequence and a few set pieces from Stone's draft, then discarded most of the rest. From Wagner and Nietzsche, Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, Mongol history, and the Norse sagas, he built a new structure. For years, Milius had wanted to make a Viking film. Conan became the route to it. His version sits closer to a samurai film than to a Tolkien adaptation. Critics have noted how far Milius stands from the Christian moral frame of The Lord of the Rings. He famously called himself a Zen fascist. He liked the term. The film's moral atmosphere belongs closer to the Iliad than to Beowulf. Achilles is the shadow behind Conan, not Aragorn. Schwarzenegger had already been cast when Milius came aboard. He trained for 18 months. For 5 months, he worked with the Japanese swordmaster Kiyoshi Yamazaki. 2 hours a day, 3 days a week, he swung an 11-pound broadsword. Yamazaki appears on screen as the Eastern teacher who instructs Conan after the slave merchant buys him. Schwarzenegger cut down from 240 pounds to 210 for the role, which runs against the old story that he bulked up for it. He also performed almost all of his own stunts. One stunt nearly killed him. In the wolf attack scene at the burial mound, the animals were German shepherds with wolf bloodlines. On the first take, the trainer released them too early. They tore off Schwarzenegger's loincloth, dragged him from the rock, and sent him about 10 feet down onto sharp stones. He needed about 40 stitches in his back, the figure most often given.
The shoot began in Spain in January 1981. The Cimmerian village stood in the forest of Valsagne. For the desert scenes, the production used Almeria, while the dramatic rock formations around Cuenca doubled for several mountain passes. The Wheel of Pain stood on a windswept plain, as absurd and severe as a punishment from a myth. Production designer Ron Cobb had just finished the interiors of Alien. For Conan, he designed both swords. The blades were forged by Jody Sampson, a swordsmith in Burbank, California. Cobb's hand-drawn sketches for the Atlantean sword survive and have been auctioned through Prop Store. The runes on the blade were his invention, meant to read as Ancient Atlantean rather than any real script. Basil Polidorus recorded the score in Rome in late November 1981 with the orchestra and chorus of Santa Cecilia plus the Rome Radio Symphony. The sessions used around 90 players and a 24-voice choir over 3 weeks. The opening track, Anvil of Crom, uses 24 French horns over pounding drums and an actual struck anvil. The complete score runs about 2 hours, one of the longest written for a film up to that date. Before James Earl Jones looked into the camera with that calm, predatory stare, the villain had a pulp life of his own. Thulsa Doom was created by Howard around 1928 for a call story alternately titled Delcarte's Cat and The Cat and the Skull. The story was rejected during Howard's lifetime. Doom reached print only after Howard's death, first in the 1967 Lancer Books collection, King Kull. Howard's Thulsa Doom is a skull-faced necromancer of unknown origin, an ancient enemy of the Atlantean kingdoms. In Howard, he is no snake cult priest. That version is Milius's fusion of the Kull villain with Howard's Scythian worship of Set from Conan stories like The God in the Bull and The Phoenix on the Sword. Milius stated plainly on the 2000 DVD commentary and in interviews around the film's release that the cult drew from Charles Manson's family and Jim Jones's People's Temple. Jonestown was still recent when Conan was being made. On November 18, 1978, 909 people died after Jones ordered them to drink cyanide-laced grape Flavorade in the Guyanese jungle. American audiences in 1982 did not need a lecture to understand the image. The mother who walks her daughter into Doom's compound, smiling and serene, belonged to a recent national nightmare. The Flower Child followers and the leader who can command death with a gesture come out of late 1970s American memory, as do the broken people making pilgrimage. The cult's fortress is the Mountain of Power. Milius linked it in interviews to Alamut, the fortress of Hassan-i-Sabbah's Nizari Ismaili sect. Hassan captured Alamut in 1090, and the Nizaris held it until the Mongols destroyed it in 1256. Their Syrian sister fortress at Masyaf, briefly recovered by the Nizaris in 1260, fell to the Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1270.
Hassan's followers were called Hashishin, the source of the European word assassin. Medieval European chroniclers claimed he controlled them through hashish and sex, with a simulated paradise garden behind the fortress. Bernard Lewis, in his 1967 book, The Assassins, showed how much of the drug and paradise story belongs to European legend rather than sober history. The political reality remains hard enough without the legend. A small religious sect used devoted assassins to kill rulers and change power balances. Marco Polo recorded the Paradise Garden story a generation after Alamut fell, and Western writers never let it go. The serpent imagery reaches deeper than Manson, Jones, or Alamut. Howard drew on Egyptian Set, the storm god, whose later iconography became tangled with the destructive serpent Apep. He also pulled from Mesopotamian and biblical serpent traditions. Milius made the imagery broader and more direct. Giant snakes coiled around pillars, a huge snake-faced statue, and worshippers who offer themselves to be embraced. The Riddle of Steel is Milius's own contribution to the screenplay. It does not appear anywhere in Howard. The Riddle of Steel is the central religious idea of the film, and it is Milius's invention rather than Howard's. Before the village burns, Conan's father tells him that no one in the world can be trusted. No gods, no men, no women, only steel. The riddle asks what makes steel strong. The boy hears the lesson, then watches Tulsa Doom use steel to sever his mother's head. Years later, Doom gives his own answer. He says flesh is stronger than steel. He raises a hand, and a young woman throws herself off a cliff because he tells her to. The will that commands flesh, in Doom's view, is stronger than any blade. That is why he can kill Conan's mother and feel no remorse. Doom cares about flesh only as a medium for his own will. Conan has to reverse the answer to survive. The flesh that beats steel is the flesh that endures. The slave learned the blade and lived through the tree of woe. Doom's answer belongs to the cult leader. Conan's answer belongs to the survivor. Both answers are Nietzschean. Only one man gets to leave the battlefield. The opening epigraph matters because the whole film works through the maxim. The wheel grinds the boy. The cold strips him down. In the slave pits, he is sharpened. He is sold into slavery, then starved and crucified. No outside redemption arrives. Crom does not answer prayers. The universe of the film is the war school of life, Nietzsche named in the heading above the maxim. Milius said in his commentary that he wanted Conan framed as a Nietzschean figure, and the film as a study in the will to power taught by suffering. Whether he ever wrote one fixed answer to the riddle, the film supplies one. Steel breaks, will endures. The strangest sequence in the film is the resurrection.
Thulsa Doom has Conan crucified on the tree of woe and left to die. Subutai cuts him down and carries the body to the wizard named in the script as the Wizard of the Mounds, played by the Japanese actor Mako Iwamatsu. The wizard agrees to call Conan's spirit back, but he warns that the price will be paid later. They paint Conan's body with marks. Around him they light a ring of torches, and the wizard chants through the night. Spirits gather. Subutai and Valeria fight them with bare blades. By dawn, Conan breathes again. The crucifixion comes from Howard. He wrote it in A Witch Shall Be Born, published in Weird Tales in December 1934. In that story, Conan is nailed to a desert tree by a Shemite captain and survives through animal endurance. The resurrection ritual is Milius's addition. Its shape matches traditions documented by Mirza Eliade in his 1951 study, Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. Eliade drew on Siberian and Mongol material, with additional sources among the Tungus and the Inuit of the far north and in Native American traditions. His central argument is that shamanic soul retrieval follows a recurring pattern across many cultures. In that pattern, the shaman enters trance and travels to the spirit world. He finds the soul that has been lost or stolen, negotiates its return, and brings it back into the body before sunrise. Body painting appears in Yakut and Buryat ritual, with a close parallel among the Tungus. A circle of fire marks a boundary against hostile spirits in Buryat seances, while chanting and drumming carry the trance. The soul never returns without cost. Spirits demand payment,
often blood or an animal substitute, and sometimes a piece of the shaman's own life force. Eliade lays this out in chapters 5 and 6. The screen ritual contains the same pieces, the marks on the body, the torches, the chant, and the promised price. Milius compresses the whole process into one night, but the structure holds. The film also includes a defensive element that sits outside Eliade's main examples. While the wizard works in trance, the body is vulnerable. Spirits may try to seize it. In Eliade's Siberian sources, the shaman handles that danger himself. In the Slavic East, armed defenders guard the corpse. The folklorist Felix Oinos, writing in the Slavic and East European Journal in 1978, documented East Slavic traditions of armed wake-keepers standing over a body during the first nights, especially when revenants was feared. Gogol's 1835 story, V, gives the literary version. The seminarian, Homa, reads psalms inside a chalk circle while demons attack the church for 3 nights. Subutai and Valeria with swords are doing in barbarian form what Homa does with prayers. They hold the boundary while the dead man is being pulled back.
The Tree of Woe carries another old shape, though Milius did not name it in interviews. In Havamal, stanzas 138 to 145, the longest of the wisdom poems in the Poetic Edda, Odin describes hanging on a windswept tree for 9 nights, wounded with a spear, given to himself, and learning the runes from the dead. The Tree of Woe is neither Yggdrasil nor the Christian cross. It uses a structure both share. A man dies on a tree and comes back carrying something from the other side. The price the wizard warns about is paid in the next film. Conan the Destroyer opens with Akiro under threat from spirits collecting the debt. Most viewers do not know the bill was already owed. Robert E. Howard did not live to see any of this on screen. The man who invented Conan died on June 11, 1936, in the front seat of his Chevrolet sedan in the driveway of his parents' house in Cross Plains, Texas. He was 30 years old. His mother, Hester Jane Irvin Howard, had been ill for years with tuberculosis. That morning, she fell into a coma. The family doctor said she would not wake. Howard walked out to the car, sat in the driver's seat, and shot himself in the head with a .380 Colt automatic he had borrowed from a friend, Lindsay Tyson. He died about 8 hours later, before his mother. She died the next day. Most of the Conan stories came from the previous 5 years. Weird Tales, the Chicago pulp magazine that paid Howard by the word, had published Conan since The Phoenix on the Sword in December 1932. Howard also wrote Solomon Kane stories and Bran McMorn stories, cool stories, and hundreds of poems, plus westerns, boxing tales, and a long correspondence with H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft fondly called him Two Dun Bob in letters to mutual friends. The two men exchanged around 130 letters between 1930 and 1936. Their collected correspondence, edited by S.T. Joshi, David E. Schultz in Rusty Burke as A Means to Freedom, fills 2 thick volumes published by Hippocampus Press in 2009. Howard liked to argue with Lovecraft about civilization and barbarism. Howard preferred barbarism. Lovecraft saw himself as the last gentleman of an extinct New England and did not. Mark Finn's biography, Blood and Thunder, first published in 2006 and revised in 2013, places Howard inside the world that formed him. West Texas oil boom towns, a father who worked as a country doctor, and a mother who was the central love and central wound of his life. His small library included Bullfinch and Plutarch, Gibbon, and Harold Lamb's books on the Mongols, Talbot Mundy, the King James Bible, and the steady noise of pulp fiction.
Howard's essay, The Hyborian Age, places Conan's world after the sinking of Atlantis and before the beginning of recorded history without giving an absolute date. The familiar placement around 10,000 BCE comes from L. Sprague de Camp's later editorial gloss, added when Lancer Books began reprinting the Conan stories in 1966 in Conan the Adventurer and the volumes that followed. By the time Howard wrote The Hyborian Age, he had picked up Madame Blavatsky's root race cosmology at second hand. In a letter to Harold Priest dated October 1928, 4 years before the first Conan story appeared in Weird Tales, Howard wrote, "The occultists say that we are the fifth, I believe, great subrace. 2 unknown and unnamed races came, then the Cimmerians, then the Atlanteans, then we." That sequence comes from The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky's 1888 work, especially Volume 2, Anthropogenesis. In her scheme, the Aryan is the 5th root race, succeeding the Atlantean 4th. Howard's parenthetical hesitation, I believe, shows a man working from accessible material rather than deep theosophical commitment. Still, he had read enough to get the order right. The likely path runs through William Scott Elliott. Jeffrey Shanks, in a 2011 essay in the Dark Man Journal, identified Scott Elliott's The Story of Atlantis from 1996 and The Lost Lemuria from 1904 as Howard's probable source. These were English-language popular accounts of Blavatsky's cosmology, still in print decades later. A combined edition, The Story of Atlantis and The Lost Lemuria, appeared in 1925. The same pattern shows up before Conan. Howard's unsold Bran Mac Morn story, Men of the Shadows, written in 1925 or 1926 when he was 19 or 20, already uses a 5 subrace scheme of Picts, Lemurians, Atlanteans, Celts, and Aryans. Weird Tales rejected it. The story first appeared much later in the 1969 Dell collection Bran Mac Morn. That template was already in Howard's head before Conan became a marketable character. This was the same pulp atmosphere that fed other writers. Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, published in 1882, was picked up by Blavatsky in 1888 and popularized through Scott Elliott. Lewis Spence wrote The Problem of Atlantis in 1924 and The History of Atlantis in 1927, offering a Stone Age Atlantis that Howard read alongside Scott Elliott's occult version. Talbot Mundy, whose books Howard read, joined the Point Loma Theosophical Society on January 1, 1923, and wrote works like Om, The Secret of Abor Valley in 1924, and The Devil's Guard, published in the United States as Ramsden in 1926. Pulp Atlantis in Howard's generation was often Theosophical Atlantis. Howard absorbed the framework, he used it as material, the same way he used Plutarch, Mongol history, and biblical names. That is why the opening of the Phoenix on the Sword lands differently when placed back in 1932. The line reads now as Pulp Atmosphere. Between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of. In 1932, that sentence sat near living occult vocabulary. The 5th root race was rising after the 4th. Howard was borrowing from the mythic history available to him. Lovecraft shows the same climate. The Call of Cthulhu, published in Weird Tales in February 1928, 8 months before Howard's letter to Priest and 2 years before their correspondence began, credits Theosophists directly. Theosophists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and human race form transient incidents. Howard was no theosophical believer in any simple sense. He treated the system as narrative ore. Atlantis and Lemuria, lost races and forgotten migrations became pulp machinery. Howard had been writing towards Cimmeria for years before Conan arrived. The character emerged in the spring of 1932 while Howard was writing around Kull, Conan's slightly older fictional relative. Howard later told correspondents that Conan appeared to him almost whole. He wrote in a white heat. He paced while he typed and shouted his character's lines aloud at full volume. Neighbors on the other side of thin Cross Plains walls complained about the noise. For 4 more years, he wrote Conan stories. Then he was dead. Milius's film opens with a Howard quote before the Nietzsche card, lifted from the first published Conan story, The Phoenix on the Sword, in Weird Tales, December 1932. The original begins, Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Aries, there was an age undreamed of. Howard attributed the passage inside the fiction to the Nemedian Chronicles. He had been dead 46 years when the film used it. Modern viewers often treat Conan the Barbarian as a guilty pleasure, a Reagan-era macho artifact, and a film whose public memory often shrinks to bodybuilding posters and the line about crushing your enemies and hearing the lamentations of their women. Some of that reputation is fair. Schwarzenegger was not a great actor, and the film does not always pretend otherwise. Milius's political style was idiosyncratic and performatively reactionary. Some scenes have aged badly. Critics were divided in 1982. Roger Ebert liked it, gave it 3 stars, and praised James Earl Jones's performance, which he read as inspired in equal parts by Hitler, Jim Jones, and Goldfinger. Richard Schickel, who disliked it, called it psychopathic Star Wars in time.
The film also does something rare. It takes a pulp fiction author seriously enough to keep much of his cosmology intact. Howard's Cimmerians remain Cimmerian, and Crom stays grim and remote. The divine names keep their old borrowings, with Set and Mitra, Bel, and others still in place. Hyboria's geographic logic stays present even when the map is absent. Milius brings production seriousness to that pulp inheritance. Ron Cobb designed the swords as if they came from a museum case, while Polydorus scored the picture as if you were conducting a barbarian Wagner cycle. James Earl Jones plays Thulsa Doom with the stillness of a cult leader who knows silence is often stronger than shouting. Under the spectacle is a sermon, and the sermon is Nietzschean. It is also uncomfortable. The world owes you nothing, and neither do the gods. Pain teaches. Will outlasts steel. There is no Christ inside this cosmology, only a memory of how the strong are supposed to bear themselves. Doom's cult preys on people who cannot live with that. Conan, thrown into the wheel as a boy and ground there until he became strong, has accepted it. The film asks the viewer to take that seriously, which is one reason it still feels strange inside mainstream fantasy cinema. You can accept the sermon or reject it. Many people reject it. Few films state any metaphysical position with this much conviction. The Cimmerians were real horse nomads who entered Assyrian records, burned Sardis around 644 BCE, and reached Homer as a people at the edge of the underworld. In County Cavan, an Irish stone called Crom stood in a plain and was said to have fallen under St. Patrick's crozier. R. E. Howard shot himself in Texas in 1936. In 1981, John Milius cast a young Austrian bodybuilder in Almeria and turned Oliver Stone's cocaine-era mutant epic into a Wagnerian pulp film with a Persian fortress, a Texas ghost, and a dead philosopher's line about suffering. That is the world behind Conan the Barbarian. It is older than the film by about 4,000 years. If you enjoyed this, the full article is on the site at crazyalchemist.com with the bibliography and the source documents listed for anyone who wants to read further. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts for more on the history of esotericism and the dark corners of belief. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.